All right. Thanks again for all of you for listening again. We have Coach who, I've probably known personally as well as anyone that I've interviewed so far, and that is Hermantown head coach Andy Fenske. Coach, thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, man. As everyone else has said, we appreciate you doing this because, like there's so many other coaches out there who are just junkies who want to learn more and want to hear more. And, we probably all listen to the same type of podcasts and same college NBA, big sports podcasts, read the same books. But how often do you get the chance to, listen and pick the coach's brains of the same type of kids who we work with almost day in and day out? So, I appreciate everything you're doing here.
I do want the audience to know, since this is just an audio file, Coach Fenske is usually one of the more classier dress coaches in the state of Minnesota. I think John Malaya back in the day when you were with Hermantown at the state tournament, I think his tweet was, "I'm going to have to cancel." Maybe it was when you're the girls' coach. It was when you're with Princeton. Not to step on your Wikipedia page here, but if Coach Fenske isn't the best dressed coach, I have to cancel my GQ subscription. And so I know you probably have that tweet framed up in your home or in your office. But Coach is wearing a T-shirt, so just know that he's not suited up today. He's rocking Hermantown T-shirt. So just for those of you, Coach Fenske is not in a suit today. But Coach, tell us your Wikipedia page, where you're from, where you played, and then where you've been, and what led you to Hermantown.
Yeah, so I take more of the Coach Clay type route there, where grew up playing basketball, doing all that. Came through the coaching family, did the multi sports, did everything. And once I got to the high school there, my love for the game far surpassed my ability to play the game. And I think I had a total of maybe like 15 career varsity games I ever played in. Came off the bench a whole lot. Had an injury senior year when I was thinking I'd be a solid six-man there, which I was pretty okay with, and didn't quite pan out. Had to deal with that. So then go to college at Gustavus. After my freshman year, I realized I kind of missed being around the game. Reached out to some local friends who grew up in the St. Peter area there and had some connections to the athletic director, and he just put me in touch with them. And I said, "Hey, I'd love to coach, love to help out. What's available?" And ended up coaching a 7th grade B team that year. And let me tell you, that'll teach you how to teach the game real fast. Then talking to the head coach, Coach Schoenborn, who was down there at the time, he led me to like a traveling, I guess down there it's called, they do 9th grade B squad varsity. It's kind of like a JV type situation, but it's a lot more of that, 10th grade group that you usually have with those smaller numbers. But they were doing a weekend like traveling JV. So I decided to join that and help out there. And then all of a sudden he stepped down and Coach Kelly Raymond came in and took over the head job the following year. And they had a 9th grade spot opened, and I applied for that. And so I got to coach with him for 2 years. And then after that, graduated from Gustavus, got my job up in Princeton, where, the coaching took over. I was initially hired on as a middle school boys coach up there. And then the girls side had a high school position that opened up, 2 of them actually. And I applied for them there, got the 9th grade girls job that I took over for kind of 2.5 years there before ended up becoming the head coach down there. And then after a little over 2 years in the interim as the head coach, went to moved up to Duluth. Remember, you were talking to Rhett McDonald there at down in Cambridge, and I just moved up here to follow the girl. And you guys were talking about your coaching staffs, who was going to be back, who was going to be around. And you brought it up there that, oh yeah, well, I know a guy who was just moved up there. You put him in touch, just gave him my number. We met up. So I went to Duluth East, coached a JV for a year, moved back to the boys side there for Coach McDonald. So I can claim that I'm under the McDonald coaching tree, which, should get me into a lot of backstage passes at the state tournaments. And then after that opened up, or after that season kind of wrapped up there, there was the opening for Hermantown there. Coach Schmitz had just stepped down. And, I had talked to the wife, talked to, Coach McDonald about it, and just said, I appreciate every opportunity I had here, but I think I kind of missed being in that one role there of being the head guy. And I learned a lot, took a lot away, and I was able to actually finish up my master's degree at the time. So the timing all really worked out. But the big thing was talking to the wife there, and who was very supportive of just being like, well, if we want this to be a long-term pitcher, I'm not going to apply for the job if this isn't going to work out, because at the time we didn't have a child, and as you know, that's a whole nother commitment within itself. So we had to make sure that it was going to work out. And she said, absolutely, go for it. And heading into my 5th season up here now, 5th season with the Hawks, and so that's kind of the long and short of it, and running through 14 years of coaching.
So, like Coach Teckham, who from Delano was the guest of mine, kind of same situation, took over a coaching job in college, and then just kind of continued running on with that here as your head coach, your second head coaching job now on the boys' side. Now, when the girls' job opened up in Princeton, it kind of became an interim position for you. It was a weird deal where I think you took over after like the first or second game of the season. And so talk about that experience, because this is something that I don't think I've had any guests on so far or coach on who's dealt with being an interim coach. And so talk about that situation and how you maybe did things a little bit differently as an interim coach before then the interim tag was removed that offseason and you became the head coach.
Yeah, so we had gone through, and it was actually at the time, it was kind of an odd situation because I was coaching as a varsity assistant 9th grade coach for the football team at the time, and that was the time we made our run down to the Dome. So actually it was the last week of the football season. The first week of girls' practices was overlapping. So I was kind of trying to have both feet in the camp at the same time. It was kind of odd to be bouncing back and forth and whatnot. But after the first game, I was sitting in class, and all of a sudden the phone rang, and the caller ID said it was the superintendent calling, and it's an odd phone call to get in the middle of the day, and they just said, just plan on running the practice. You guys are running the practice today there, and so went with it, rolled with it. Actually, right after school there, we buzzed over to the superintendent's office. He just said, as of now, you and Coach Milbrand at the time, now Coach Rashavi, you guys are going to be co-head coaches, and you got that interim tag for now, and you guys will figure out what to do. So that kind of took a lot of communication on our part, because so we had to figure out how we were going to tell the team that this was kind of the situation for now, because we have, you're so in the dark with these things as things are being, looked into. So we had gone through and met with the girls there, talked to them, and just kind of said, here's what we know, here's what we don't know. We got to get ready because we had a game versus Sauk Rapids Rice in a day. Well, that practice was kind of a waste. We had one practice to get ready for that. But not knowing how long the interim tag was going to last, we tried to run everything as Coach Johnson had run it prior to that. We'd kept all the same plays, tried to run a lot of the same things. The drill-wise, I started shifting things more towards mine because Coach Rashavi, or Coach Milbrand at the time, she felt a lot more comfortable sticking with her JV group there since she had known those and worked with those. And I said, I was ready for that. And we just had hired on our first varsity assistant coach, who then Coach Schlepper there, Coach Magnuson, had stepped over and then taken those 9th grade girls. So we just got done getting beat up pretty handily by Cambridge, and so they're kind of down on themselves for that. But we found our way to get back, and it was probably about mid-February. We were about a couple weeks out from sections that we realized things were going to be a little bit different in that, we're anticipating this is how it's going to be for the rest of the year. So we ended up switching some things around there, just with different types of plays, different types of sets that were called, the drills and things like that. And I think it was, I don't want to say relieving for everybody, but it felt like, okay, we can move on to the next step. And everybody, the girls playing stepped up a lot too there. We were kind of towards the bottom of the section anyway. I think we ended up as a 6th seed that year. But we hit a little bit of a winning streak there towards the end of February. And I think it was it brought us to a closure to the end of the season that we weren't prepared for. I mean, who's ever going to be ready for that? But then once that off season came around, the job opened up. I was talking to Coach Milbrandt and saying, well, hey, are you going to be applying for it? What's your situation there? And I don't believe she ended up actually applying for it, as me and a couple other candidates. And kind of being that interim coach and being a part of the program before, I think kind of gave me an inside leg. Knowing so much of the interview panel, it's always so different when you go in for any interview, whether it's a job, whether in the professional field or, your extracurricular field. But when you know everybody, it kind of puts you at ease a little bit there, and it felt a little bit more informal because we were running a youth camp, and then I came over and interviewed quick, and then I went back over to the youth camp at the time, and but then I officially got the job there and ran with it for 2 years there, and it was a good learning experience. I try to think back to all the key parts of my coaching that have helped me be as successful as I think I've been. But I think a lot of it comes from working with younger kids, teaching at a young level, and then teaching those middle schoolers, coaching middle schoolers, but especially going through that interview where I was trying to balance two things at once, keep my coaching the same as it always is, but also help out and run things just in case the other coach was coming back, and then I'd be moving back down to my role. So it was an interesting experience, to say the least.
Yeah, I know that was my first year in the district, so yeah, it was strange, to say the least. But like you said, I'm sure when you have the interim tag on, that once it kind of gets informally removed and like the team knows, okay, this is how it's gonna be the rest of the year, there's probably a huge relief that takes place. Now you mentioned my internet I think just got laggy for a second, so just make sure in case anyone missed that too. When you were at Princeton, you led them to the state tournament, first ever in school history. And then you, like you said, your now wife was up in the Duluth area. So you took the leap and you moved to Duluth without a coaching job, and you ended up on Duluth East staff with Coach Rhett McDonald, who was on here a couple weeks ago. And so talk about that transition from being a head coach, leading your team to the state tournament, to then now being an assistant coach. Talk about that transition.
Yeah. So we were very fortunate there. I had a phenomenal group of girls in what ended up being my last year down in Princeton. We were, I believe, it was a 20-win year for us there, which is only like the second time in school history for the records that we had at the time. But we were making a run there, and Princeton basketball had been to the section final 2-3 times beforehand, but just couldn't break that hump. But we were very fortunate in that we were the number 1 seed that year. We had to go against Grand Rapids, which was, they had a Division I girl on their floor, but we had a handful of athletes there who were ready. And I think, 4 or 5, I think might have all my top 6 players that year ended up going to play collegiate ball at the next level. So that always makes the program better, right? They always make you look like a far better coach when you got those type of players. But going from that and then stepping back down and going to the assistant role, I like to give Coach McDonald a hard time there, where it's like, well, geez, I had to do everything for him there. I'd flip his chair around for him there, because he likes to sit down. I don't know if I don't remember him mentioning that in how he likes to have his coaches set his chair up for him there. But it was, I feel like I was a better assistant coach this time around because I knew a lot more of what went into the head coaching realm. I mean, every assistant, if they haven't been in that situation, they believe they know what's going on. And, I've heard the old adage there, once you move those 12 inches at one chair over, it's a world of a difference. I mean, you have to live with every decision. Your assistants there, they can throw things out all the time. But they don't have to live with the final consequence of it. But I think when I got to East there, Coach McDonald was just phenomenal. He just let me go with those JV guys, and that was a very tough year going from that. And we ended up with, I think my JV had like 4 or 5 wins that year, and everybody was just pumped because they're like, wow, you got this group to win that many games. Like, geez, you must know what you're talking about. I'm like, oh boy, no, I promise that's not true. But it was a lot more of those little things like helping break down some game film, throwing some ideas in for practice planning. I mean, I was at a charter school at the time. He was over at a different school. I mean, most of the time, I was coming in there and my JV assistant coach had started practice because I was 45 minutes late half the time. And by the end of the season, as we start paring things down, that's the majority of the time, right? But he always let me have a voice in things, pregame, postgame, scout reports, things like that. He let me really get into that. And I think it was simply because I had that head coaching background and he knew a little bit about that. And, I think it was really great. As I'm sure we always want those assistant coaches, you hope they stick around forever because you're going to hire on those guys and girls who are just phenomenal at those jobs. And you're torn because you want them to be there with you forever, but you also want to help them grow and hopefully become a head coach themselves or move on and do bigger and better things. And I think that helped too, is knowing that I wanted to get back into that. So moving over from the girls side to the boys side, just kind of getting that feel of it, because it's a different pace of play, it's a different style of game, and I think it's just it was good to have that transition year in between.
So what's one thing you learned from Coach McDonald that you took with you to Hermantown?
Oh, geez, where to start? I mean, the things that Coach McDonald teaches everybody is just unbelievable. No, he's I think the biggest thing is just the passion of coaching there. I mean, that guy just lives and breathes basketball, and you can see it in how he coaches and the way he does it. Some people perceive that as he's just getting so anxious, so excited, and they see his yelling as demeaning, as more of it is as that motivation, that passion coming out of him. But honestly, it was great because I got to see, he had just the one child at the time, and then his second was born shortly the year after I left there. But just seeing what it's like to have that true balance of family and basketball. I mean, his wife, grew up with, I'm pretty sure they're high school sweethearts. I don't know if he wants that divulged on social media and whatnot, but she grew up in the basketball world there too, so she knew what it was like, where the commitments that it takes and all the sacrifices. So I think seeing how he balanced family and basketball, because ultimately the family, our family is everything to us, and as much as we love the game and love what we do, we got to remember where the true priorities lie with our coaching world.
So you took over at Hermantown. What was the first thing that you wanted to do to not necessarily fix or change too much? Because, like you said, Coach Schmitz had been to the state tournament a couple years before you were there. But what was one thing you looked to do to improve the program?
Well, when I first took over, it was about middle of June there, because I had to wait till the school board was officially approved everything. So they're already a couple weeks in, and so I went in and I met the team, met the guys, got ready for my first workout there after knowing nobody. Not even the assistant coaches, who are now my assistant coaches. I just wanted to, first of all, gauge what talent was there. Because coaching over at East, we play, Hermantown East plays twice a year every year. So I got to see what it was like there, and I knew that they had just graduated a whole bunch of seniors. They graduated 13 seniors that year, I believe it was. And so it was seeing what was coming back. And at the time there was just the one, Nate Sumas was the only guy coming back who had any significant varsity experience. And the rest were all JV guys. So I was like, okay, well, here's where we're at. Here's where we're starting. What a great time to start fresh. So the first thing I started doing was seeing, just kind of what type of tenacity, how passionate, how much do they love the game of basketball. And, the summer schedule was already set at that point by mid-June. So I kind of had to roll with what was there. Coach Schmitz, he was more than happy to help, but it was a unique experience as well, because both my assistants who are my assistants now had both applied for the head job, and naturally so, it's kind of that natural progression. But it was a unique experience then, because it was, they had both known that they kind of got passed over for me at the time, and I think, I don't want to say there's animosity at the time, because they're both great guys now. Drew and Joe and I are hanging out all the time. We're texting back and forth like middle school girls, even like when we get home, as I'm sure most staffs are. My wife just drives her crazy. But it was just, we had to see what was going to be there and what kind of team it was going to be based off their toughness and love for the game.
So I know one of the first things that you did was establish a youth association, I believe, from our interactions, either just from, text messaging or talking before games, as we play each other once or twice a year, depending on, this is the first year I think we played each other twice. But just our pregame conversations, I know that, there's youth teams in Hermantown, but it seemed like kind of like maybe a rogue parent would take a group over. And then I know, did a lot to establish that youth association, or to help create or form that youth association. So talk about that, because I know there's a lot of coaches that will take jobs or have taken jobs where they're in the middle of taking over a job that there's not really a set youth board or youth association to be a feeder program for your 9 through 12 program. So talk about how you helped create and build that.
Yeah, so it started back with Coach Pottis when he was the head coach for about 5 years here. He There was really no Hermantown youth basketball. I believe at that time it was still run through Duluth, as all of the Duluth area youth basketball association. So all the Hermantown kids would go there, right? And so there's no, I don't want to say school pride because I don't know if that's a true thing at that elementary age, but there was just there's no connection between those kids and what the high school, product was. So he kind of got those rolling there, and there's a couple of leagues up here that, there's one kind of a lower level league, and then there's one that, you'd almost equate it to the MYAS schedule. And it's at 5th and 6th grade where they kind of overlap a little bit. So it's, they kind of start to separate themselves a little bit. But these teams are all kind of parent run, self run. As a high school staff there, we were in charge of like the quote unquote tryouts, I guess, the evaluations to kind of help split those teams up. And, but after that, it was really everybody was just doing random tournaments at random times. They would, like, the money they would make from hosting tournaments, they would keep for their team for the following year for entry fees and whatnot, which just kind of baffled my mind a little bit, just because, down in Princeton there, the youth boards were set up well in advance for both of us at the time. It was just a well-oiled machine. I mean, there's always tweaks and always things you're going to implement and you want to kind of see fit your style. But it was, there was a lot that needed to be changed there. And so one of the people I talked to was actually my dad. He ran the youth program down in Marshall for years and years. And he was kind of, even after I went through, my brother was going through at the time, even when he was done, he kind of helped stick around and was a mentor, a liaison, so to speak. So he was the guy I went to help say, like, how do we go about establishing a board? Where do we start? And it took about a year of figuring out, and I know there's a couple of coaches you've had on here, Coach Cresath, and I forget who else had said, like, they have, like, their whole hands are delved into their youth program. And that's where I was at. But it was also, there's a lot because we didn't have any set guidelines or anything like that. So it was a lot to take on. So we went through and I got some people some awesome volunteers who were just, they're all about helping and making it better for their kids and then our program as a whole. And so they really helped out in setting these, getting the bylaws set up for our youth board and doing all this and kind of setting up, the checking account and then all this stuff. And then all of a sudden I was like, okay, well now we just have our weekly, our monthly meetings. And when we're setting it up there, okay, we got gym times. Well, I help coordinate that, but I help coordinate with this one person. It's not just me trying to piece all these kids' practice times together. It's this one person. And then I just submit all the paperwork and all the official stuff to our community at the time. And in terms of tournaments and stuff like that, it's so much smoother. We have our coaches meetings. We talk about stuff like that where, I kind of lay out some expectations. I do the first couple of years here, I've done a parent meeting every year, just even with our youth kids, just kind of make sure they know who I am. Cause I was brand new to the community. Even though I had been living in Duluth for a year at the time, it was, Duluth's one of those big, small towns, you run into so many people. It's like, well, if you see me out, like, stop me, say hello, let's talk hoops, let's talk about your son, let's talk about, life in general. And so I just want to get my face out there too. And I think the board helping organize that and organizing all these parents and all those little tiny components that make a youth program so successful. I taken what Coach Fadis done, Coach Schmitz and myself, and kind of just ramped it up, so to speak. And I think it's getting there. It's not perfect by any stretch of the word, but we're running in the right direction. And it's still a lot of work, but it's giving me a lot more freedom to coach at the varsity and the high school level where, those parents are like, don't worry, we got this taken care of. We kind of know your vision. You take care of those boys and we'll worry about the rest for now, which is a huge relief.
So one thing that I would say as someone who's watched you as you record the girls coach here when I was the boys coach. And then just from our interactions playing each other, a handful of times here in your 4 years as a Hermantown head coach, and just the conversations throughout the year about various teams and various things. One thing that what I would always say about your teams is that no matter what your guys' talent is going to be, is your team and guys or girls are always going to play extremely hard. And that's the one thing that we always tell our teams before we play Hermantown is they're going to play hard. You're not going to catch Hermantown. They might on an off night, right? They might not shoot well. might turn the ball over, but you guys are going to play hard. And I think so much of that deals with your ability to build relationships, and I've seen that front and center. But one thing that's always been really impressive with me, that I've noticed has been impressive for you, or that I've been impressed with, I should say, is your ability to build relationships with all of your kids. I think sometimes as coaches, when we get into the meat grinder of December and January, we start to, okay, who are our 6 or 7 guys who are going to play? Make sure those guys are doing well. We're checking in with those guys. And but I feel like you do an amazing job of kind of making everyone feel valuable. So talk about ways that you build relationships with your players, and that's everyone, but also specifically then maybe the second part of this, how do you keep invested and keep involved players like 8 through 10 or 8 through 12?
Yeah, so thank you for that, first of all. That's it's always nice to hear that. It's, I think we invest a lot into our kids as well. You know, Obviously it's so much easier to build those relationships and work on that outside of, like you said, the grind of the season, outside of November to March. I try so hard to build those relations up in the summer. Obviously I feel a little behind the 8 ball this year already, but having been established here for a few years, it kind of helps ease that transition a little bit. But one thing I think that's been a huge benefit to me is having the elementary background and the middle school, I've never been in the building with my kids. When I eventually took over as the girls coach in Princeton, I had taught all those girls, and those seniors and those juniors, some of those girls had moved up when I was the 9th grade coach. Well, so I've been able to coach them a year or two already before I took over for them for those next 2 years at the varsity level. So that was a huge benefit. Not too many people get the opportunity to do that. But it's so important to build those relationships in the off season because it's during the season. It's the cliche. You're withdrawing from the bank. You're asking so much out of them, but they're going to give it to you because you have that relationship. You make those deposits early on. So I think that's been a huge benefit. But not having ever worked in the same building as my players, I try to make a very conscious effort to go ahead and build those relationships with those kids. When I was at Duluth East, I was at the charter school. I'm still 20 minutes away from the school. We ran on the same school calendar, so it's not like I could just, pop in, on the day I had off of my district and go see those guys and just, hang out with them at lunch or, talk to them, go talk with the AD. It's not like, you go to, Mr. Labs' office and every kid in the entire school is down there. It's, God, the kids just love that guy. And then I took over in Hermantown, and I was still, I was closer to actually Hermantown High School than East High School at my charter school. But because of my schedule and my assistant coaches at the elementary school, and then the ones at the high school, we always had late practice. Well, that gave us time to, we always were either watching film, weightlifting, trying to do something before practice, where I was face to face with them. As those first couple of years, I wasn't paring down practices so much. And, I know it's never a good thing. I was in Princeton. We did at East, but those first years, it was so important to me to build those relationships with those guys. I wanted to see them as much as I could. And, that panned out and worked out for the first couple of years. And then I moved over to the elementary school in Hermantown. So I'm at least in the same district. We start an hour later, so sometimes I can, before my contract hours start, I can pop up there, and a few kids are in the gym shooting in the morning and go talk to them and do things like that, and then make my contract hours, which is the hop, skip, and a jump from there. But it's been very important to do that. And then, as I alluded to earlier in my Wikipedia page there, not ever having been a varsity starter or a big key component to it, I can empathize with those kids who aren't in the limelight. Those guys who are scoring and playing all the time and getting a ton of minutes. It's important to build those relationships with those kids, but those aren't the kids who need it the most. Those kids who you go out and find. I hate using the term role player because every kid has a role. Your role may be 36 points tonight, and Peter Sumas, shoot the ball anytime you can. Go score. Do what you need to do. That's your role. But those kids who are outside that limelight and aren't going to get their name in the headlines or the local news or things like that high school kids love so much, those are the ones you got to build up the most and call on. And those are the kids who are going to continue to bust their butts. And I think the more you can build those kids up, the harder they push those starting kids. And it's leads to that snowball effect, because then that pushes them just that much more. It's something we try to do. And my varsity assistant, Coach Borak, this year, he's down at the Elm. He's a first grade teacher. So he and I are down there, and we have a lot of common times where we can sit and talk. And sometimes we'll run up there on our prep and lunch hours and just try to buzz in, because our other assistant coach is a PE teacher up there. So there's always one or two kids we can catch up there and do that at the time and help build those relationships during the day, which I think means a lot to them too. But it's a situation that not everybody's in.
So offensively, your team has been really successful the last few years. Obviously, like when we scored a lot of points last year, it was mostly because of the players that we had, right? You've had some good players. Peter Sumas is going to UMD, and we've had good players as well the last couple of years. But let's talk offensively. And you made it pretty clear in our text conversation that you didn't really have much to add on the defensive side of it. So those are your words. It wasn't me throwing shade or anything. So let's talk offensively. For those that aren't familiar with Hermantown, talk about what offense that you guys run and what some of the looks are that you guys are trying to get in your offense.
So a lot of what we do is motion-based. That was something that I've always wanted to do, and I started to implement it in Princeton based off the type of personnel that I had down there. And part of it came from working under other coaches who ran a lot of sets and did a lot of things. And as a guy who I felt like was, slightly maybe above average intelligence, who knows, remembering a whole bunch of sets and things like that in the heat of the moment, whether I was a player or coach, I could do, but I didn't feel like it was the most effective. So I wanted to make sure I could find a way to get motion going. And seeing what type of girls were coming through a program in Princeton at the time, I found a style of motion, it's essentially a read and react to it, and it turned out to be very effective, worked really well. But again, we had the players who could do it and the players who could roll with that there. And we had very high scoring offense. For our section final game, I think it was 80-74 for girls basketball, which typically you don't see a whole lot of. So offense was always a strong point of mine there. I had to make sure to hire on, Coach Jacobs at the time to be my defensive guy and to, keep me grounded and remind me, hey, we can't spend the full 2 hours on offense today. And I said, well, if we outscore them, who the hell cares? No, excuse me. I'm sorry. I know Coach Carrier was saying stuff there too. So hopefully that's not, we're not getting censored.
You're good.
And then went to Duluth East there and Coach McDonald. He had set after set, and with his style of offense there, he was running the Chin series at the time from Coach Beeline at Michigan there, and a handful of sets running off that. And it worked out well. But I think at the time there, towards the end of the season, with his out of bounds plays and sideline stuff there, and he's admitted it that he had way too much at the time. I think he counted it like 54 things. I'm like, Coach, I don't even remember how to run these things. I don't know how the kids are going to, and then so. I think another benefit of going from head to assistant back to the head coach, you pick up on a few things there, but you get to tweak things and adjust things. And it's a little bit easier to make those adjustments when you're kind of starting fresh again. Every coach would like to start over, go back to their first year and do things a little bit different. Well, I got the chance to do that and see what kind of kids we had there. I wanted to stick with the motion style first because I felt like I could teach that the best, first of all. But we had some kids who were athletes who could play, and I think it's such a huge benefit to teach them the motion. But for a solid motion, you need to have guys who can take guys off the dribble. So we spent a lot of that first summer working on, just being quick and explosive off that first step, because in high school that's so huge. If you got that one step advantage on them, that can make or break an entire offense series. And so we stuck with that there. We had a few sets, a few things that we implemented for if we kind of got into a rut, or we were continually pounding one gap the entire time, or we were just kind of in a stagnant offense there. We had a few continuity things that we would call out just to get them moving. And the sets we did have, everything that we did, if it broke out, we always go back to our motion principles. It was the same this year. This year's it was a year we had the most sets for players that I've ever had in my 14 years of coaching, where I've had control of the team. And it was the most that we've ever had, but each one of them where at any point the play, the action that we were hoping to get didn't work out, we were into a motion set, a 4-out-1 in tight set. I know there's a lot of teams that run the 5 out there. But I think I'm more partial to 4-out-1 in, just because it creates bigger driving lanes for our kids. It does get clogged up a little bit more around the basket, but we teach our post guys to, make those reads and make those adjustments, and then they're just fine with it. So, we like to play fast. It's always been a fun thing to do. Every kid says they want to play fast until it comes to the conditioning part, and then you see who really does and doesn't. You get those labs kids there. I get to have Taylor on my team and Tate with yours there. They don't stop running ever. So they're good motivators, good leaders to get those other kids going too. But it's a fun style to coach. It's a fun style to play. But it's, you have to give up so much control as a coach to run those types of things and run motion offense. But it's so much more rewarding, I think, because then you kind of see what types of things they are, and you can kind of start thinking about other things and moving on to the next thing that a coach needs to worry about when we're standing up in the box.
So you mentioned a really good point about running motion stuff, and kind of the same type of stuff that we run is that you have to be comfortable giving up the power to the kids to make decisions. And so obviously every coach is going to have their sets that they go to, their sheet player play sheet or whatever they're going to go to in the situation. But giving up that power is, I think, the hardest part for some coaches. A lot of people, not tooting my own horn by any means here, but people have reached out since I started this podcast and they see our scores kind of asking, oh, how do you guys play fast? It's like, you just have to give up power. I mean, that's the biggest thing. It's like, if you want to pull them back, and we talked about this with Red a little bit when he was on a few weeks back, is if you want to play fast, you got to let them play, because if you start pulling things back to run sets, you're slowing down your momentum. You're not letting the game kind of take care of itself and get the flow of the game get established. And so I think you hit on a really good point there. Last thing here, specifically to your offense, what are some of your main teaching points? I know you mentioned read and react. I know you talked about looking to beat guys off the dribble. So what's maybe the one or two, maybe non-negotiables within your 4-out offense?
Oh boy. We got to make sure that, number one, guys are always looking to share the ball. I mean, with a motion style offense, guys got to kind of know their strengths and weaknesses, and that comes from that self-awareness. But we need to help them out as coaches to understand where they're at, and that's why we have those meetings and those check-ins, whether it's daily, weekly, or a couple times a year. Because you can run a motion style offense, give a guy freedom, but you might have a kid who he catches the ball in the corner three, and he may be shooting less than 10% from there, but it's going up every time because that's not a conversation you've had. So one non-negotiable is, we got to make sure we always know our roles, know our responsibilities out there. And again, that ties into, that's why I hate using the term the role player, because every kid has a role out there, especially in our offense. So one thing is we got to make sure that they always know what they're going to do. If you catch in this spot here, this is not a good spot for you right now. We hammer home, be phenomenal at your strengths, work on your weaknesses, but we try to pound their strengths even further. But the big thing that I would say, that the other thing we got to think about is reading the second defender. And that's such a hard thing to teach kids, because we want all of our guys, we said, well, you got to be great off the dribble. We're anticipating you can be one guy, but there's going to be, ideally, in a perfect situation, every coach is going to have, 2-3 guys in help for sure. So you got to make sure you got to be able to read them. So are your eyes up? Do you have that basketball IQ to see, okay, where are his shoulders at? What angle is he sitting at right now? Is he in an angle where he can get over and stop me before I get to the rim and I got to kick it out? Or do I got to pull up from here? Do I got to, pitch back out? But we just, the way that I found that has been most successful for us is, we just run breakdown drills of it. I know the hot buzzword is small-sided games with it. But you just, you set up certain scenarios, you set up certain situations, you got to make them make reads, and it's never the read on the first defender. It's always the second one. So we, we'll have kids, start hip to hip or something like that. So that way you're simulating they're beating off the dribble, but it's not dummy D, because then kids hear dummy D, they don't play defense at all, which we have enough problems with. So we start them hip to hip at just a disadvantage. And okay, now this is your read in this situation. Okay, sometimes he's going to come at you. This should be your next thought, your next read essentially. But if he does this and you do this, and it's so much easier when you got guys who just love the game and want to be a part of it, because they just eat all that information up, and you get those great guards, those great ball handlers who can, score 20 a night, or they can go for 15 assists, or they can do both in the same night. And I shouldn't say just guards, but we just refer to essentially everyone as a guard outside of our few tall guys we've had where we call them wings. It's a tough thing to teach, but those are the things that we really try to hammer home in our offense to make us be as successful as we are. And we also shoot a ton during practice. I hear so many coaches say we don't get enough shots up in practice, and we make it a point to because if we do catch us on an off night there, we better make sure we're volume shooters to try to balance those averages out. And those are kind of big things, big keys of our offense.
So we're gonna go into some quick rapid fire questions coming from Twitter. So I think you're pretty active this time of the year and in your following. So I got 4 from Twitter here. First one, we'll answer these quick. Stephen Bruce, upbringing with your athletic grandfather and your dad. Is that one of the reasons why you got into coaching? I know you mentioned your dad with your youth program development at Hermantown. Are those two influential in your coaching today?
Yeah, I mean, to a degree they are there. Actually, I just got off the phone talking, FaceTiming with my grandpa, so Milo could get a chance to see his great grandpa there, if they're living 5 hours away and sequestered and, everything like that. But, we're actually just talking about it there a little bit today too, in preparation for this. He graduated from Gustavus. He was a, All-American football player there, got a head coaching job in Rush City, ended up getting a job down in Marshall. And, he was a guy who clearly built relationships with his kids, because I'm coaching down in North Branch 2-3 years ago. And all of a sudden this elderly lady comes up to me and she goes, "Oh, do you know Bob Fenske?" And it's my grandpa, right? And so, "Oh yeah, I was one of his managers on the football team, his 30, whatever it was, 1963. And I'm like, okay, well, clearly he made an impact, with her and her, because then her husband, which was a boyfriend at the time, was one of the players on the team and whatnot. So, so I grew up with that. He was a 3-sport athlete. Dad was a 3-sport athlete, went to college, which was a 2-sport athlete at Southwest State there. He coached my grandpa was a head coach for 12 years. My dad was never a head coach, but he coached football, basketball at various levels, boys and girls, middle school, high school. He did a little baseball as well there. He coached for a grand total of 24 years. And so we grew up in a sports family. I mean, our family vacations were when there's no youth tournaments or anything like that going on in the summer, where we could go up to Bemidji and visit the family up there and do things like that. I mean, everything was centered around what our sports schedule was like. It's crazy to think that, how much of that just, impacted me there, So I do, like every coach, I have a tough time struggling when, okay, you guys are going on a 2-week cruise in the middle of basketball season, okay, I got to understand that not every family grew up the same way I did, but they're definitely a big influence. We were talking about it between the 3 of us there. This will be our 50th year of, some coaching at the high school level between the 3 of us there, which is, no, it's not the McDonald family type, but it's I think it's a pretty cool thing. And they, growing up with the multi-sport, I love multi-sport athletes. I'm always willing to work with kids, especially during this time when they got to be gone for baseball, and usually when they're busy with football stuff. Like, yes, go do that stuff. This is a perfect time to do it. So they've kept me grounded, and they keep me, they always love chatting after games and breaking stuff down. And my grandpa he'll be the first one to sit there and talk to you about, he was a teacher too. So as every teacher does, 90% of the questions we already know the answer to. He'll sit there and he'll talk about, the players and who's coming back and where kids are going and what kind of schemes, what kind of stuff are they doing. He was never a basketball coach, but he was just a coach, and, coaching's coaching. And you can, if you know how to coach, at any level, you can do it at the highest level or the lowest levels. It's about, it's about the basics and doing all those things. So they were a big influence in my coaching realm.
All right. So who's your tailor, and who has more sport coats between you and Rhett McDonald?
Oh boy. All right. So make a plug here. Mainstream stylist down in Superior Street there. Anyone in the Duluth area, they can use some business right now, as that part of the street's getting redone right now. But between Coach McDonald and myself, he might have more but I'm going to attribute to the fact that he has also had the chance to, he's never had to work in a charter school. So, my budget was a little bit tighter those few years there, but he also can rock the bright, you've seen the neon red sport coat that he wears, right?
Yep.
For the big games. Yeah. When he plays, especially the Cambridge games, he always busts those out. And I think he has for a few hitting ones too against Uncle Joel there, but he's definitely got the brightest and most fun type sports coats. That's for sure.
I think you should go over to me. You talked about getting mainstream, some business. You should go buy yourself a nice bright yellow Hermantown Hawk jacket to wear for games this year. I think that would go over well. And then last question here, Chris Hopkins, former guest as well. Hockey's a huge sport up in Hermantown. This is a really good question to think about because we run into that with these communities our size where we're maybe graduating classes of 2 to 250 kids, but yet we have wrestling, basketball, hockey, 3 sports that can draw a lot of kids at the youth level. So what are some ways that you create momentum and then keep kids off of the ice?
Yeah, well, that's always
$1 million question.
Oh gosh, if I had the answer to that one up here, every coach in the Northland would just be throwing money at me. No, I think a huge benefit to us is, as I mentioned, my one assistant is a first grade teacher. I teach second grade, and then Coach Smith, the former teacher, is the PE teacher in the elementary school. So right there, we got 3 of the 5 teachers, male teachers, I should say, in the elementary school are current or former basketball coaches here. So we get a chance to interact with those kids all the time, and it's crazy the amount of kids who still have the opportunity through probably about 5th grade up here where they can still do hockey and basketball. It works itself out a little bit. There are a few conflicts. Wrestling is not quite as big as it is, in the Princeton area and a little farther south there. But it helps with us being in the elementary school. The flip side of not being around at those high school guys is we can try to draw some of these kids in young and try to just make it fun for them. And we host youth camps, a couple times a year, for 3 days in the spring, a couple days in the fall, and then, they got their winter stuff. But we just try to pump them up. We try to get them to all the games there. One of the other teachers who's retiring this year is a music teacher. And, we got him to coordinate with between 2nd and 4th grade. I think there's like 70 some kids who come and sing the national anthem for our home games. And that just draws interest. And there's a lot of hockey kids who are in there and everything, but, we just try to get them to have fun with it and try to get them in as much as we can. Cause, at the youth level, especially at such a young age there, it's about the enjoyment of the game. And that's where I think, most of us fell in love with the game was around that time. It's so much easier when the kids love it there. And, when they do have to make a hard choice, we are going to win some of those, but we're going to lose some too. And, especially up here where, it's not just the Northland, but, it's Hermantown. It's hockey is king up here. And, they're always going to draw some, more fans for a home game. But, we feed on that. We feed on that a little bit there. We play in, mostly empty gym. We got a brand new gym there, and they built up a ton of bleacher space for us there. But unfortunately, we haven't been able to fill them as much as we wanted yet. But we're getting there. Slowly but surely, we're getting there.
Coach, I appreciate you. First off, I know you tune into most of the episodes as usually kind of throw a text my way about something in each episode. Also, again, congrats on everything that you're doing at Hermantown. I know you've had a good couple groups through the last couple of years, but winning the section a couple of years ago, and then playing De La Salle pretty tough down the state tournament. I know that can be a challenging task. And thanks again for coming on tonight. I know it's Wednesday evening when we recorded this, so I appreciate you taking time with your family and your summer to come on and share some of your information, and hopefully coaches will walk away like all of these with some information that can help them. Now the workouts are starting, teams are in the gym. They can, apply some of the information that they're hearing in this. So, Coach, thanks. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, man. Appreciate everything you're doing.